The envelope was already bent at the corners because I had been turning it over in my hands for almost 20 minutes. I was sitting alone in a hospital hallway at 8:40 in the morning, staring at my name on the front like it belonged to somebody else. Around me, people were moving in and out of doors, nurses calling names, carts rolling past, phones ringing somewhere down the hall. It all sounded normal. That was the worst part. My whole life felt like it was hanging on a few pages inside that envelope, and the world still sounded like a regular Tuesday. For the last few months, my body had been acting like it was quitting on me a little more every week. I was tired in a way sleep never fixed. My hands would shake for no reason. Some mornings I got out of bed and felt like I had already finished a full day. I kept telling myself it was stress, bad food, long hours, anything simple. But simple had run out. I lived alone, worked in billing for a supply company, kept my place clean, paid rent on time, and didn't ask much from life. I wasn't the kind of guy people worried about because I didn't give them much to notice. Then one day I was sitting in a clinic hearing words like specialist, more testing, we need to rule things out, and suddenly even making coffee in the morning felt uncertain. I looked down at the envelope again and thought, just open it. Get it over with. That was when I heard heels moving fast against the floor. I looked up, and this woman in a dark suit was coming straight toward me like she had already decided I was the answer to something. She looked polished in that way some people do even when they're clearly falling apart. Hair pinned back, phone in one hand, expensive coat over her arm, but her face was tense and her breathing was off. She stopped in front of me. I know this is insane, she said, but I need help. I just stared at her. My father is in room 614. He's been asking me for months why I'm always alone, and right now he's weak and worried and impossible, and I told him my husband was parking the car. She swallowed. I need you to be that husband for 5 minutes. I actually laughed once because I thought I had to be hearing her wrong. You want me to do what? Please. Her voice changed on that word. Less controlled. More real. Just for a few minutes. He needs to believe I'm not facing everything by myself. I looked at her face again, and that was the thing that made me say yes. Not the story. Not the weirdness of it. Just the fact that she looked scared in a way I understood too well. So I stood up, still holding my envelope. What's your name? Marissa. I nodded. Okay. I'm Daniel. On the way to the room, she gave me the fastest briefing of my life. We had supposedly been married a year. I worked in operations. We lived downtown. Her father's name was Victor, and he liked simple answers and hated obvious pity. When we walked into the room, Marissa's whole body changed. She slipped her hand around my arm like she had done it before. Victor was propped up in bed, thinner than he should have been, with sharp eyes that checked me over in half a second. So, he said, the husband finally appears. I gave him a small smile. Parking was a mess. That got the tiniest reaction out of him, almost a grin. Marissa exhaled beside me so quietly I don't think anyone else would have noticed. The next few minutes were strange mostly because they were so easy. I pulled a chair close to her. He asked me what I did, and I answered carefully. He asked how we met, and Marissa jumped in, talking about a delayed flight and bad coffee and acting offended when I corrected one detail. At one point she touched my shoulder while she was speaking, natural as anything. I played along, but after a while it didn't fully feel like playing. It felt like the three of us were building a soft place for an old man to rest in for a moment. Victor looked at her differently with me sitting there. Less tense. Less like he was trying to solve her life before his own strength ran out. When we stepped back into the hallway, Marissa let go of my arm slowly. For a second neither of us spoke. Then she saw the envelope in my hand. Her expression changed right away. You're not here for someone else, she said. I shook my head. No. I'm here for me. She looked at the paper, then at my face. Bad morning? I don't know yet. She could have said thank you and walked away. That would have made sense. Instead she glanced toward her father's room, silenced her phone, and said, "I'm staying." A nurse called my name a minute later. I went in with my throat tight and my hands cold. The doctor sat me down and explained that I had a long-term autoimmune condition. Not the end of my life. Not the disaster I had built in my head. But real. Treatment, routine changes, regular follow-ups, more discipline than I had ever needed before. My old normal was gone. A harder one was waiting. When I came back out, Marissa was still there. She stood up the second she saw me. What did they say? I looked at her, this woman who had been a stranger 40 minutes earlier, and I said, "It's serious. But I'm going to be okay." Her shoulders dropped with relief like she had been holding that answer inside her own body. "Okay," she said softly. "Then let's start with that." And standing there in that hospital hallway, with my future suddenly unfamiliar and one hand still wrapped around a crumpled envelope, that was the first moment the day stopped feeling like an ending. She got my number in the most practical way possible. Right there in the hallway, after the doctor gave me the news and I came back out looking like I had been dropped into a different life, Marissa took out her phone and said, "I'm not letting the man who just played my husband disappear without at least making sure he gets home in one piece." I gave her a tired look. "That sounded smoother in your head, didn't it?" She smiled for the first time that morning. "A little." So I put my number in her phone. I honestly didn't think much would come from it. People say they'll check in all the time when emotions are high. Then real life takes over, and that strange moment you shared with somebody gets packed away and forgotten. But that night, around 8, my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. "How are you holding up?" I stared at it longer than I should have. Then I typed back, "Been better. Been worse." A few seconds later, "That sounds like a man trying too hard to sound stable." I looked around my apartment while I read that. Small kitchen. One chair pushed under the table. Work boots by the door. The place felt even quieter than usual. I typed, "I am stable. Just confused." She wrote back, "Confused is allowed." That became our pattern before I even noticed it had become one. The next morning she asked if I had eaten. 2 days later she asked how the first follow-up call went. After that she checked in after work, usually late, usually brief, but never careless. Some messages were simple. "Don't ignore your meds. Drink water. Tell me you made it home." Some turned into real conversations once the hour got late enough and both of us stopped pretending we were still in work mode. A week after the hospital, she asked if I wanted coffee. I almost said no out of habit. My whole life had been built around not bothering people and not needing much. But I had spent the last few days getting calls from doctors, reading instructions I barely understood, and sitting alone with too much time to think. So I said yes. We met at a place halfway between my apartment and her office. She arrived in another sharp outfit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, but she looked exhausted under it. Not messy, not dramatic, just worn down in the eyes. She sat across from me, wrapped both hands around her cup, and said, "You look better. I learned that if I eat before noon, I'm less likely to feel like collapsing. That's a strong strategy. Very advanced." I laughed, and just like that the tension broke. In the hospital she had felt like a woman in crisis. In the coffee shop she felt more real. Smarter than almost anyone I knew, quick with little comments, used to being listened to, but not in an arrogant way. More like someone who had spent too long being the dependable one. She told me she ran a company with 2 partners, that most of her days were meetings, numbers, decisions, people needing things from her every hour. She said it flatly, no bragging, almost like it was another kind of burden. I told her my life was less impressive. Same job for 6 years. Same apartment for 4. Same grocery store, same bus route, same dinner half the week. She leaned back and looked at me. Do you know what's funny? What? That sounds peaceful. I almost argued with her, but I knew what she meant. After that first coffee, seeing her again stopped feeling unusual fast. We didn't force it. It just happened. She called after one of my early treatment appointments and heard something in my voice I was trying to hide. "You're home?" she asked. "Yeah. Did they say the adjustment period might be rough?" "More or less." There was a pause. Then she said, "Open your building door in 10 minutes." I pushed myself off the couch and actually did it. She showed up with soup from a deli near her office and a paper bag with crackers, fruit, and electrolyte packets like she had raided a pharmacy on the way over. She stood there in heels holding a plastic container and said, "Don't make this dramatic. I'm here for 20 minutes. She stayed an hour and a half. That was the day I realized how alone I had actually been before all this. Not because I had nobody in my contacts. I knew people. Co-workers, a cousin in another city, a couple of guys I grabbed drinks with once in a while. But there's a difference between people who know your name and someone who notices the exact moment your voice sounds off. Marissa noticed. And little by little, I started noticing her too. Not just the obvious things. Not just that she was beautiful, because she was. It was more the cracks in the polished version of her. The way she went quiet after calls with her father's doctors. The way she kept saying she was handling it, in a tone that clearly meant the opposite. The way she stayed at work too late because going home to an empty place felt worse. One night we were on the phone past midnight, and she got unusually quiet. "What?" I asked. She let out a breath. "Do you ever feel like people only come to you when they need something steady to lean on?" I sat on the edge of my bed, listening. "All the time," I said. She gave a small laugh. Not amused. Just recognized. That might be the least attractive thing I've ever admitted to a man. "I don't know," I said. "Pretending I was your husband 5 minutes after meeting me is still pretty high on the list." That got a real laugh out of her. By the end of that second week, she knew the schedule for my appointments better than some of the staff. By the end of the third, I knew which days her father was stronger and which board meetings left her sounding like she wanted to throw her phone into traffic. We didn't call it dependence. We didn't call it anything. But when something happened, good or bad, she was becoming the person I wanted to tell. And somehow, without either of us saying it out loud, I was becoming that person for her too. If you're rooting for this unexpected connection, hit like and subscribe for more stories like this. What started as one strange morning in a hospital had turned into something neither of us was treating like an accident anymore. By the time her father was strong enough to complain properly again, Marissa and I had already become part of each other's week in a way that didn't feel accidental anymore. She came with me to 2 more treatment appointments, not because I asked, but because she somehow always knew when I was pretending I didn't need anybody there. She'd show up with coffee, sit beside me like it was the most normal thing in the world, and keep the conversation moving when I started getting too quiet. Sometimes we talked about nothing important. Bad music in waiting rooms. Strange office politics. The fact that hospital chairs were clearly designed by people who hated comfort. But even that helped. It made everything feel less heavy. On the harder days, when the treatment left me drained and irritable, she never acted offended by it. She just adjusted. She'd sit in my apartment with her shoes off, answering work emails from my couch while I lay there pretending I was still following the movie she had put on. If I fell asleep, she stayed. If I woke up embarrassed, she told me to shut up and drink water. I got used to hearing from her first thing in the morning. Got used to knowing which nights she'd be stuck at the office late. Got used to being the person she called when the polished version of her stopped working. One night she came over still wearing that sharp, expensive look she always seemed to carry out of work, but the second she stepped inside, I knew something was off. She dropped her bag by the chair and stood there with both hands pressed to her temples. "Bad day?" I asked. She laughed once. "That's the clean version." I handed her a glass of water, and she took it without even looking at me. Then she sat at my kitchen table and finally said, "I am so tired of being impressive." That hit me harder than I expected. She looked up at me. "Everyone thinks that because I handle things well, I must be fine. At work I solve problems. With my father I stay calm. With friends I'm the one who organizes everything. I walk into every room and people assume I'm the least fragile person in it." She let out a breath. "I don't even know how to be anything else anymore." I sat across from her. "You don't have to do that here." Her face changed a little when I said it. "Not dramatic. Just softer." That became the center of us, more than the flirting, more than the obvious pull that had been building for weeks. We were useful to each other in a way that felt private and real. She made my life feel less lonely and less uncertain. I gave her one place where she didn't have to arrive already put together. The attraction was there. It had been there for a while. I noticed it every time she touched my arm while talking, every time she looked at me a second too long before saying goodnight, every time she forgot to keep that careful distance we both pretended was still there. But neither of us rushed it. Maybe because we both knew this was being built on something stronger than excitement. Maybe because naming it too soon felt risky, like we could break the strange good thing that had grown out of such a bad morning. Then Victor called. Not Marissa. Me. I was at home going through work emails when my phone lit up with a number I didn't know. I answered, and after a rough little cough, a voice said, "Daniel. This is Victor." I sat up straight immediately. "Hey. How are you?" Improving enough to become difficult again, apparently. He paused. "I asked Marissa when my son-in-law plans to visit without hospital lighting and fake parking delays." That word hung there. Son-in-law. I didn't know what to say, so I went with honesty wrapped in something safer. "I can come by if you want. Victor calls me his son-in-law." Would you have told him the truth right then, or kept the lie to protect him? Let me know in the comments. "I do," he said. "You were good for her." After the call ended, I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time. When Marissa came over that evening, I told her. The second I said her father had called me, she froze. "He called you directly?" "Yeah." She closed her eyes for a second. "Of course he did." I watched her pace once across my apartment and back. She wasn't angry. She was scared, and that was different. "What are you thinking?" I asked. She stopped moving. "I'm thinking this was supposed to be one small lie told in one hospital room. And now my father likes you. He trusts you. He thinks." She looked at me, then away. "He thinks you belong in my life." I stood there, not saying anything too fast. Because the problem was, Victor wasn't the only one who thought that. Marissa must have seen it in my face, because her voice dropped. "This is where it gets messy." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe this is where we stop pretending the original reason is the only reason we kept seeing each other." She held my gaze after that, and the whole room felt different. Smaller somehow. More honest. "You know what scares me," she said quietly. "It's not admitting the lie. It's admitting that somewhere along the way I stopped wanting you to be temporary." I took a step closer to her. "You think I still see this as temporary?" She laughed under her breath, nervous this time. "I don't know. You're careful. I'm careful because this matters." That landed. I could see it land. For a few seconds neither of us moved. Weeks of phone calls, hospital visits, coffee, late-night honesty, all of it seemed to gather right there between us. What started as a role we played for comfort had turned into the one thing in my life that felt solid. And judging by the way she was looking at me, she knew it too. We can't keep hiding inside the old story, I said. She nodded slowly. I know. But neither of us stepped back either. Because the truth was already there now, plain and impossible to ignore. We had just finally said enough of it out loud to make the next move real. We didn't decide anything that night. That was the strange part. After everything we finally admitted out loud, after Marissa said she didn't want me to be temporary and I told her this mattered too much for me to treat casually, neither of us made some big speech. She stayed a little longer. We sat on my couch with a movie playing neither of us watched. When she left, she touched my face for a second at the door like she was checking something was real, then said goodnight in this quiet voice that stayed with me after she was gone. The next 2 days felt different anyway. Not awkward. Just clearer. Her texts were the same on the surface. Did you eat? How was the appointment? Are you home yet? But now there was no shield around any of it. No pretending we were just two people who happened to get tangled up after a weird morning at the hospital. Whatever this was, we both knew it had outgrown that. Then Victor was discharged to a rehab wing for a short stretch before going home, and Marissa called me from her car. He wants to see us tonight, she said. Us. I leaned back in my chair at work and stared at the ceiling for a second. Okay. She was quiet. Are you all right? I asked. I think so, she said. I just don't want to walk in there and do the old version of this. I knew exactly what she meant. The rehearsed smiles. The easy cover story. The safe little performance that had started all of it. Back then it had been about protecting her father from one more worry. Now it felt different. Too small, maybe. Too false for what had grown around it. When I met her outside the hospital that evening, she was standing by the entrance with her arms folded tight, looking more nervous than I had ever seen her. Not on that first day, not on any late-night call, not even when she talked about how tired she was of being the strong one. I walked up to her and said, "Hey." She let out a breath. I have negotiated contracts worth millions. I have fired people. I have stood in rooms full of men who wanted me to blink first. And right now I want to run away from one conversation with my father. I smiled a little. That sounds about right. She looked at me, then shook her head with this small, unbelieving smile. You make everything less impossible. That got me right in the chest. Before I could overthink it, I reached for her hand. She looked down at it, then back at me, and this time when her fingers closed around mine, there was nothing uncertain in it. We went upstairs like that. Victor looked better than the first time I saw him. Still tired, still thinner than he should have been, but sharper, more present. His eyes went straight to our hands when we entered. He noticed everything. I think he always had. Well, he said, you both look serious. Marissa moved closer to his bed. Dad, there's something I need to tell you. He waited. She swallowed once, and I felt her hand tighten around mine. The day you first met Daniel, he wasn't actually my husband. Victor stared at her, then at me. I expected anger. Confusion. Some kind of blow-up. Instead he just sighed and leaned back against the pillow. I assumed something about that story was too neat. Marissa blinked. You knew. I knew my daughter was frightened, and I knew the young man beside her cared more than a stranger normally would. He lifted one shoulder. The details were less important. Nobody spoke for a second after that. Then Marissa said the thing she had really come to say. What was fake then isn't fake now. Victor looked between us again, slower this time, and whatever he saw seemed to settle him. No, he said. I don't think it is. I don't think Marissa had prepared for that. All that tension she had been carrying seemed to leave her at once. She sat down carefully by the bed, and her eyes got glassy for just a second before she pulled herself together again. Victor looked at me. Are you good to her? I answered the only way I could. I try to be. He gave one small nod. Good. Keep doing that. That was it. No long lecture. No dramatic fallout. Just the truth finally catching up to the lie that had introduced us. When we left the room, Marissa stopped in the hallway and turned to me so suddenly I almost walked into her. For a moment she just looked at me, really looked, like she was letting the whole thing settle. Then she said, somewhere between your diagnosis, those awful waiting rooms, my father, your couch, my stupid late-night calls, all of it, you became real to me before I had the nerve to say it. I felt this calm come over me then, the kind that only shows up when something has already become true and all that's left is to admit it. You became real to me a long time ago, I said. I just didn't want to push this into words before you were ready. She laughed softly and wiped under one eye before anything could fall. So what do we do now? I stepped closer. Now we stop treating this like something strange that happened under hospital lights. She nodded. Okay. And when I kissed her, it didn't feel sudden. It felt overdue. A few weeks earlier I had walked into that building alone, convinced my life was about to narrow into something smaller and harder. In some ways, it had. The treatments were real. The schedule changes were real. The harder version of life was real. But so was this. Her hand in mine. Her face close to mine. The look on her face when there was no pretending left to hide behind. We left the hospital together that night, not as two strangers holding up a story for someone else, but as two people finally telling the truth at the same time. And once that happened, everything after felt simple enough to trust.